Hello, everybody. Good day and welcome to your live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction here at Ruby, and also one of your chef instructors in the courses. Today's event is my office hours, and this is your chance to ask cooking and food-related questions, and I'll do my best to respond to them. And I'll ask you to focus on those topic areas rather than stray into nutrition and medicine and other allied fields that are too far away from the stovetop. That's really my comfort zone here. Okay. But I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items as we get started. And first of all, silence your cell phones. Kidding, of course. As you look at your screen in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a white dialog box that says Add Question Here. Please feel free to add any questions or comments that you have along the way. And, as you contribute to the dialogue today, it really creates more of a conversation. And so I think that's a good thing. The next thing I want to mention is that on the right-hand side of your page, you'll see a number of questions that have already been populated by our students today, our viewers. And I want to thank you all for your proactivity. As you look at the individual question box in the upper right-hand corner of each one of those, you'll see a heart-shaped icon. And if you click on the heart, it'll push the question up in the sequence of questions so that I'll answer it sooner than later. Okay, so it increases the priority. But of course, I will answer all the questions today. So just stick around, and we'll have a very nice program. All right. So without further ado, let me go ahead and jump into the questions. And again, I want to thank you all for joining me today. So at the top of the list from Valentina, hello. I have a few questions about garlic. Number one, what's the best way to peel it? Two, when a recipe calls for the whole garlic cloves, is it okay to lightly crush them? It makes peeling easier, but does this method affect the flavor of the final dish? So the best way to peel garlic, there's probably more than one answer to this, but what I typically do is I'll set the cloves on the cutting board, lay my knife over the top, and then whack the top of my knife. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about here. And it will spread out the clove a little bit, break that filamenty skin, which makes it, as you mentioned, much easier to peel. Now, how does that affect the flavor? In recipes that call for whole cloves, it will increase the surface area a little bit, right, as those cracks that are created in the clove allow more of the internal flavors to seep out. And so it'll start to flavor your preparation a little bit more or a little bit more quickly. So that's the difference. If you want to still, you temper that by using the intact clove, then take your time to peel the skin a little bit more carefully without creating cracks in the clove itself. All right, thank you. And next from Robert. I found it very convenient to use a pressure cooker for grains when building a dish. I wondered what your thoughts are using that tool, and if you do use one. Any tips regarding rice or quinoa? Excellent. Yes, I think the pressure cooker and the more modern, electronic version of that by various brands, Instant Pot being one of them, are excellent tools to have in the kitchen. I use an old school stovetop pressure cooker, and multiple times a week, as a matter of fact. And an excellent thing to use when cooking more dense foods, whether they're legumes or larger grains like wheat berries or rye berries, for example. Rice, brown rice would be another example. And let's see, as far as any thoughts go, I still soak most of the grains that go into the pressure cooker, soak them for several hours or usually overnight, sometimes even a couple of nights, because I've got mise en place, it seems, on every counter in the kitchen, just awaiting, the next meal or the next day's activities. So the soaking will make the cooking a little bit faster. The pressure cooker itself shortens the cooking time, but soaking does help. And, when it comes to, cooking different grains and legumes, my typical approach is to put in a lot of water. And so it's essentially what we would call the pasta method of cooking grains. And then I'll time the pressure cooker to the desired doneness. And then, I have the option of straining the liquid or using that in cooking in some fashion. Sometimes I use the liquid in the immediate dish that the grains are going into. Sometimes they go into an entirely different place. It could be a smoothie. It could be a different soup, for example. So I've got that option built in. Certainly the more water you use in cooking, the more flavor is going to be drawn out. But, you can bring that grain to water ratio pretty tight so that that's not a concern. When it comes to quinoa, I personally don't cook quinoa in the pressure cooker because quinoa cooks very quickly. And I will do it on the stovetop, in a saucepan using the pasta method. That allows me to just gauge for the desired doneness that I'm shooting for. And then I'll strain it, and then it's ready to go in whichever direction that I prefer. Okay, so those are a couple of thoughts to share. But otherwise, I'm very happy to hear that you're using a pressure cooker. It really is a nice piece of equipment or a kitchen tool to use. Thank you. And the next question. Hello, Marina. Do you have any recommendations for setting up an efficient kitchen workspace? Are there particular considerations for workflow? What benefits or pitfalls are there to consider? When it comes to kitchen design, it seems like the what's called the work triangle is still a popular sort of tool of analysis to help lay out a kitchen or to troubleshoot an existing kitchen. And, basically a triangle is, it's of course an imaginary triangle that connects different workspaces in your kitchen. And, commonly those workspaces, include your refrigerator, perhaps a dry storage or a pantry, as well as a prep area. Your cooking area. The cooking area is probably most commonly your stovetop, but it could also be your oven, especially if the oven is in a separate location from the stovetop. And then the sink or the general cleanup area. And then in addition to that, there could be a beverage station, right? So there are multiple places to consider. If we were to look at the core areas in a kitchen, they're probably going to be your refrigerator, your stovetop, and your sink. Those are the three most commonly considered. And so we try to think about the path that we travel between those areas, and we try to make that area relatively small. So we're not taking more than 2 or 3 steps, let's say, between each of those points. And if you have the space in your kitchen, it's certainly nice to set up multiple triangles. And, I have worked in kitchens where there are more than one sink, more than one refrigerator, more than one prep space, for example, more than one cook station. So it's possible for more than one person to cook in that same space. Now, one thing to avoid is, generally speaking, is crossing paths with somebody else in the kitchen, because that brings up the risk of bumping into one another, as you're moving around, sometimes very quickly, especially in a commercial kitchen, and in our kitchen at home too, as well. It seems like I'm um, pivoting, doing 180-degree spins on my feet to move from one place to another. And so if someone sneaks in behind me, there's always the chance of bumping into each other. And I guess as a corollary to that, there's a lot of verbal communication in the kitchen, announcing that I am behind somebody, or if somebody's behind me, I expect them to inform me. If the oven door is opening up, I want to know if that's behind me, those sorts of things. So communication becomes a part of that. But back to, the design aspects here. So, we try to create triangles for efficiency. And if there are multiple triangles, they shouldn't overlap, ideally. I'll add a couple of additional thoughts. One is that I have worked in kitchens that are small enough that I was standing in the middle of the triangle. So, as I looked in one direction or turned in another direction, there was the sink within reach or the refrigerator within half a step. And that was, albeit small, a super efficient workspace. I wasn't spending time walking around the kitchen to get things and then to get back to my workstation. So those, that's a nice thing to consider if one has a tighter space to work within. Okay. And, the other thing is, if you have a large space, bringing that kind of efficiency I think it's important. I'll give you another example. I've cooked in many commercial kitchens, which were large, and things were so spread out that it took a little bit of time, extra time for mise en place and to put away things in the refrigerator and to go back and forth to the oven or the cooktop from my prep station. Whereas at home, where things are in much tighter quarters, it can be much more pleasant to, for example, test recipes, because I'm just taking a couple of steps in any direction. So the size of your kitchen shouldn't be a barrier to any of the design considerations. In fact, the larger your kitchen, arguably the more important it is to focus on the work triangles. All right, thank you. And next up, buying weekly groceries and minimizing loss of items. Okay. I purchase items for recipes, but often lots of leftovers. Or I purchase special items, such as spices, but only one-time use. Unless I eat the same way every week, how do I maximize my groceries? This is a great question. And, one that I think affects all of us. It's certainly something that I'm aware of, if not every day, almost every day, right? How to utilize what is left over in the refrigerator, whether it's actually a leftover from a previous meal or if it's just some more raw product that needs to be used up. I constantly am thinking about perishability and shelf life and getting the most value, right, out of that purchase. And I think that's wise shopping. It's frugal shopping. And I think that's really the way to go. Now, I'll start with the second part of your question first. When it comes to these, specialty sorts of items that might relate to regional cuisines or certainly a spice shelf, my encouragement for you is to start bringing those into your cooking routine more frequently. And that's really, I think, the crux of solving this sort of an issue, right, is to broaden our cooking repertoire and to enjoy these other flavors more frequently. Otherwise, those items will go to waste very simply. Now, you also have the option to give them away to somebody that might enjoy them. Now, when it comes to, just the other routine items, celery and carrots and onions and potatoes, for example, that are perishable, here it really is a matter of shopping quantity, right? And being strategic about how much food we bring home or how much, food that we order. In the case of, ordering food or, certain pack sizes from these warehouse shopping places like Costco, it's a good idea to perhaps team up, right, with a family member or a friend that has their own household, so that you can split the purchases. So you're not sitting on a 20-pound bag of onions because they do go bad after just a few days, especially in the warmth of the summer very often. And so we need to, I think, reach out and purchase strategically. Those are, really my strategies for mitigating the same concern that you have. All right, thank you. And next up, hello. I was wondering if you could talk about the best way to peel and cut ginger. The odd shapes always throw me off. Also, what is the best way to store and save it for later so it doesn't go to waste? Aha. So in terms of peeling ginger, and I guess this, gets into the cutting as well here. I will very often cut off some of the little finger protrusions in order to have a piece that's a little more uniform in shape. And as far as peeling goes, I use a spoon, and the spoon tends to pull off the relatively thin skin of the ginger very nicely, and just regulate the pressure so that you're not taking off too much of the meat of the ginger. And, in terms of slicing, from there, I will treat it like any other sort of round item, like a potato, where I'll cut off a small flat edge, lay the piece of ginger down on that flat edge so it doesn't roll around. And that's for safety as well as efficiency. That allows me to then, cut through, it cuts cereal slices through the ginger at whatever thickness that I choose. And then from there, I can proceed to long skinny cuts, and then, a small, a very tiny dice or a mince as I desire. Okay. And then, I just handle all the different pieces of the ginger in that manner. Now, there are times when I don't peel the ginger as well. That's not a requirement. Just rinse it off or wash the surface, because it's not uncommon for dirt to hide, in those tiny crevices. And so, I might break off a nub of ginger to access some of those nooks and crannies. But, once I clean it, then if I'm putting it into a stew, for example, a simmered dish where it's not going to stand out visually, then I'll just go ahead and slice away with the skin on. Or I'll put it into the mortar and then pound it to Dickens with the pestle. So I have a quick paste, and then that just goes directly into the pot for simmering and flavor extraction. Now, especially if you're dealing with fresh, or I shouldn't say fresh ginger, but young ginger, the skin is very, very thin and delicate, and there's no need to peel the ginger. Just go ahead and slice it and enjoy. Okay. And in terms of storage, I find that ginger loses its flavor fairly quickly. Once it's sliced and you've all that surface area that's exposed. So, I don't cut ginger in advance on purpose. There are certainly times when there's some left over, in which case I'll put it in a ramekin and cover it up with plastic wrap and store it in the fridge. And then I'll try to use it as quickly as I can. And if it sits around for a few days, it's certainly usable, but the flavor fades during that period of time. And so it loses a lot of its freshness, a lot of its vibrancy. Okay, so do keep that in mind. Thank you. All right, next up, what's the best way to keep fresh herbs? I wash mine and wrap them in damp paper towels, but they don't seem to keep. Any advice? Well, that's exactly what I was going to share with you. So let me take a look at some other methods or some other approaches. I think, the wrapping in a damp towel depends on the type of herb. I find that some of the delicate herbs like cilantro, they do better if they're kept a little bit on the dry side as moisture, in my experience, tends to promote decay at the edges of the leaves, which of course infects the rest of the bunch. But also with some of those fresh, delicate herbs, again, cilantro comes to mind, basil comes to mind, the shelf life is going to be short one way or another. So it really becomes important to use the product quickly. Which gets into other questions of preservation. You can chop it, you can puree it, you can put it into smaller parcels, for example, an ice cube tray, and then store it in the freezer to extend the shelf life. And then you can pop out, those small parcels, and then finish a dish with that. You wouldn't want to. Use it as a garnish, of course. It's not going to have much to offer at that point, but as a finishing component, you can still pull some value from that. Otherwise, back to fresh herbs. Another thing that I'll do is, or have done, I guess I do off and on, or I have done in the past, is to stand them up in a container with a little bit of water, like a bouquet of flowers. And that works for many items. It works for cilantro. Try not to let the leaves make contact with the water, just the stems. But once again, with those more delicate herbs, you still need to use them pretty quickly. With more hardy herbs like thyme and rosemary, for example, you have much more leeway in terms of time. You might and no pun intended, right? But you might have a week, sometimes even more than that, while still preserving some nice flavor. Those are very rich in oils as well, which is one reason why the shelf life is much longer than something like basil or cilantro. Okay, and so those are a couple of things to consider. All right, thank you. All right, next up, hello, Claire. Will you please explain the benefit of parsley? I know it's used to add color to some recipes, but to me it has no taste, and I'd rather use cilantro or basil, for flavor and color. Just don't understand why I'd want to use it at all. Well, Claire, welcome to the herb counseling corner here. Just kidding, of course. If you don't like parsley, I think the quick answer is to sort of avoid it and go directly toward the cilantro or the basil, those things that you do enjoy. And, as you encounter cilantro in recipes, feel free to experiment with other fresh herbs and, reach for those that have much more aroma, which translates to flavor. I find parsley to be quite flavorful, and I have been on a tabbouleh kick for, I think, all summer, and I've probably made 20 different versions of tabbouleh, and I really push the parsley forward style of tabbouleh. But it's certainly not a requirement that you use it. Okay, and find enjoyment in other herbs. All right, thank you. All right, next question. Are you going to include tips on how to freeze various produce and how to use the frozen produce in dishes? Specifically for asparagus, tomatoes, broccoli, cauliflower, etc. I use online instructions with various results. Okay, so I'll give you just my quick approach to freezing vegetables. Ideally, vegetables are frozen individually, so you would set them out on a sheet pan. You would put that in your freezer, let them set up, and then gather them up and put them into a sealed storage container, a Ziploc bag, for example. Okay, so that you can extend the shelf life. Regarding frozen products, I also recommend using them relatively quickly. Products still declines in quality in the freezer, namely things dry out. It's a slow process, but it's an ongoing process. And so I recommend you use used items. Don't forget about them. Otherwise, regarding some of these things that you've mentioned, it depends on what the end use is. Okay, broccoli, for example, can be blanched. And that'll lock in some color, and that sets you up for the next step of your cooking. So you blanch it first, so you can freeze it, And once you pull that out, you can proceed with the cooking steps. Cauliflower, probably not necessary to blanch. Not necessary, optional, of course. Tomatoes, if you want to remove the skins, right, you can blanch, then peel, then freeze. And asparagus, I'd recommend trimming off any tough, woody ends, if that applies. And then that'll leave you with a product that is much easier to handle when it comes out of the freezer. Note that when things go through a freeze-thaw cycle, that they're going to be soft. Okay. The exception would be small items like corn kernels and peas, but otherwise, when the cellular fluid expands, it'll rupture the cell membrane, and then when the item is thawed, it's more flaccid, and so we're not going to use these things for a garnish. If they're going to be used in a salad, they're probably most suitable for a salad that is bound with some sort of a dressing, one that might otherwise start to soften the product anyway, maybe a vinaigrette-based dressing, for example. So those are some things to keep in mind, okay, as you handle frozen product. But otherwise, freeze them individually. That's the way they're done at the processing plants, for the things that we buy at the grocery store. It's called IQF, individually quick frozen. Okay, and most of us don't have a quick freeze equipment at home, but we can mimic that process the best we can by laying them out on a sheet pan and then storing them in a sealed container. All right, thank you. What's the best cutting board to use? Plastic, wood, bamboo? Regarding cutting boards, my general recommendation is to avoid particularly hard surfaces. Okay. I have seen cutting boards made of glass and stainless steel, which are not my favorites because they're going to shorten the life of the cutting edge of your knives. Okay. So move down the spectrum of cutting surfaces toward things that are a little more soft. And so those that you've mentioned are probably all preferable to stainless steel and glass. If you look and read some of the conversations online, there's some technical information out there. Some folks really split hairs over the hardness of bamboo versus certain woods, and some people might never use bamboo because of the silica that's present and how it dulls the edge of the blade. I don't see that as a big problem in my life, but I'll leave that up to the individual cooks to decide. I use plastic, wood, bamboo. There are different types of wood. There's teak and oak and hinoki, which is Japanese cypress, and many other products. There's different types of plastic as well. I've got some run-of-the-mill white plastic cutting board right now in the kitchen, but there are other Japanese-made professional kitchen sort of focused sort of high-tech plastic cutting boards. Some of them have they're bonded plastic and wood to give you additional softness while you have the benefits of wood. And so there are a lot of combinations out there, and I think that they can all be fine. But again, avoid the really hard stuff. Stainless steel, glass. Keep in mind that we still need to maintain our knives, right? So this, creates a segue into that topic, right? We need to hone our blades daily on a steel, and then as needed, the knife itself needs to be sharpened, on a stone or a grinding wheel of some sort, depending on what kind of technology you want to use. Okay, and for home cooks, that's probably done, maybe once a year. Okay, you might give it take a little bit depending on your cooking frequency and the way that the knives are stored and treated. Okay, but I think any of those surfaces for cutting boards can be quite fine. Thank you. All right, next up, is there a bacteria risk with uncooked tempeh? One blog said you can get sick because it is fermented and the bacteria produced is bad for you. Another recipe said it tastes better marinated and cooked, but there's no risk eating it raw. Okay, let me begin by responding to these generally these questions around food safety by saying that there's some risk with any food. Okay, when it comes to contamination, especially with pathogens, right? Disease-causing microorganisms, pathogens. There's a potential risk, and the more an item is processed outside of your home, the less control you have, and arguably the greater the chance of contamination. And in fact, that's where we tend to see, at least in the U.S., most of the foodborne illness outbreaks. They happen in peanut butter plants. They happen in spinach processing plants and many other places. And it's when other people and other tools or contact surfaces that have been contaminated are coming in contact with the food, and then that contaminant, that pathogen, then makes its way into your kitchen. And if it's a food item that is not heated high enough to kill the pathogen, then it may make you sick, right? If you're a member of a high risk population or a higher risk population, an infant or a young child, a pregnant person, an elderly person, or otherwise somebody with a compromised immune system, then you're at higher risk for getting sick. But very often, others that have a robust immune system, we might encounter some of these pathogens, and they don't slow us down, at least not for very long. Okay. Now, the other concern here around foodborne illness, and Carol, I'm taking a bit of a tangent here because I want to complete my thoughts around food safety, and that is the concern around spoilage. Okay, so spoilage bacteria is going to be, or microorganism. It could be fungus, right? Yeasts. Those are just all the other routine things that are in our environment, in our air, on our fingers, just on all the surfaces that are around us. And those are no big deal for most people most of the time. They do shorten the shelf life of food. And so that's why we want to refrigerate foods properly. We want to cool hot foods quickly. And we still want to, regarding pathogens again, but, these microorganisms more generally, we want to heat foods to temperatures that will mitigate the count, right? The population of those little critters. All right. Now, when it comes to uncooked tempeh, so tempeh is a fermented product. So there's going to be a whole lot of microorganisms in there. Those are not pathogens. They're not disease causing, unless the consumer, that particular consumer, has an adverse reaction to that particular strain of bacteria. Okay, but otherwise, for most people, most of the time, tempeh is not going to be a concern. It needs to be handled properly, and then again, we're fine. If you're working with an audience, a consumer audience that is particularly anxious about tempeh, then be sure to cook it to 165 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 15 seconds. Heated all the way through, right, in order to neutralize the bacteria and most pathogens as well, as far as I know. And that should take care of, the concerns. Okay. Thank you. All right. Next up from Sammy. I want to do bechamel sauce with gluten-free flour. What's the best way for it to be done to avoid lumps? Most of the time I use gluten-free flour. I have to add, too much liquid to keep the sauce or crepe mix soft. Okay. So a bechamel is a roux thickened sauce or mother sauce. Okay, so it's going to be a white roux plus milk, okay, in its traditional form. And we're combining the starch thickener, that's typically wheat flour, but a starch thickener more generally, with clarified butter, right? It could be some other fat, but clarified butter in a 1-to-1 ratio, okay, and typically by weight, all right? We combine that over fire, over heat, excuse me. And, within just a couple of minutes, you have your white roux. And you want to incorporate that, thoroughly, all right, evenly. I recommend for smaller quantities a whisk. That works very nicely. A spoon or a wooden or bamboo utensil can work very nicely as well. Just take the time to make sure it's evenly incorporated, the flour and the fat, the clarified butter. Okay. Once you have the white roux, let that cool a little bit before adding your cool liquid. Okay. Now you want to have the fire back on when you add the cool liquid because you want to then heat up the liquid with the roux at the same time as you're whisking the roux in. Okay. Now you want this to happen fairly quickly. So you want the fire to be on a fairly high setting, and you want to whisk pretty quickly and add the liquid little by little. And you can see the starch, absorbing the liquid and thickening the liquid. And so this is kind of a simultaneous process. You've got some relatively high heat under the pan. You've got a whisk in one hand, and you've got your cool liquid that you're adding, in small quantities, or maybe in a constant but small drizzle as you're whisking in. Actually, you need a third arm now that I think about it. So maybe you can set down the container of cold liquid, whisk in, and then add as needed. Okay. But use a whisk, and then you will not have lumps. All right. The other thing to consider is the roux will oftentimes hide, at the edge of the pan down here. So be sure to whisk at the very edges of the pan to bring out the roux so that it can be incorporated into the liquid. Okay. That takes care of most all of the lumps. Now, on occasion, there's still a little lump here and there, in which case it's common to strain the sauce at the very end. Okay, then that takes care of the problem. All right. Now, also keep in mind as we use gluten-free flour or any flours, okay, that each one of them has what we call a certain thickening power, right? In other words, it's a liquid absorption quantity, and it differs, okay, from starch to starch. So as you move from one flour to another, the amount of liquid that you're going to use will vary as well. Also keep in mind that as a liquid sits, you mentioned a batter, right? You mentioned crepe batter. This could be true of pancake batter, waffle batter. As those items sit, they continue, the flour continues to absorb liquid. And so that's why they get thicker. And so if you're making, a batter and letting it sit, which is often a recommendation, you'll need to make a final adjustment before you go to use it. Okay. Now, an alternative to that is, with some experience, you can purposely add a little bit too much liquid, so it appears pretty thin in the beginning, but after it rests, it'll thicken up to your desired consistency. Okay, so give those two approaches a try, okay, regarding a roux thickened sauce, and then also a batter, right, in terms of getting to know the thickening power or the absorption rate of different flours. Thank you. All right, next up, I'm a graduate of the Pro Plant-Based course. I'm looking for a chef and sous chef for a health restaurant I'm opening in 6 weeks in Paris and would like to employ a graduate from Ruby. Is there a forum I could advertise the position on? My first thought that comes to mind is to take a look at the ProPlant Facebook page and put the word out there. Okay, that's just for the Ruby ProPlant grads. And just got the word in my left ear that one of our culinary school partners in Stockholm, Sweden, which uses our Pro Plant course as the foundation of their program, has a number of graduates that are in the available pool, and they have a current cohort that'll wrap up in probably another half a year or so, and so there would be a fresh batch of graduates coming up in several months' time as well. And if you want to reach out to student support, I'd be happy to share with you, the link to their site, or you can take a look at Veg Chef, and you'll find their school located in Stockholm, Sweden. Thank you. All right, next up, what have you found in the years of teaching culinary arts to be the most difficult for most students to grasp? Well, I think in terms of any specific tasks or specific, knowledge areas, all those come with time. And, I think if anything, I find students that expect the knowledge and skill development to come too quickly. And they get frustrated with themselves, they get frustrated with the process, and they get frustrated with the longer term path of finding professional work in this world. And so that's probably the most challenging thing, right, is to keep a person grounded, right, with a humble attitude and a longer term vision, and also at the same time a focus, right, just an engagement with the joy of developing their skills. And I often will draw similarities to skill development in the area of music, right, or sports. And it takes a long time, right, if you want to get to a level of proficiency where you're playing in front of a public audience, whether it's music, right, or if you strive to play sports at some higher level. It takes a while, and some of us never get there, but those that do understand what goes into it. And so cooking is the same way. We need to study, we need to cook, and we need to do so with great focus. And that message is perhaps the most difficult because, at least in the United States, so many young people expect very quick results. And as we know, life doesn't work that way. But that's what comes to mind. Thank you. All right, next question. What is your method and materials for freezing foods? When I freeze foods, it's usually very simply something that I made in large quantity, right? That's left over, or that I strategically made in a large quantity that I want to stash away so I can tap into it in a couple of weeks' time or in another month or so, because otherwise it would take me half a day to make it again, right? And so that could be a sauce, it could be a stock. A couple of examples come to mind. It could be a soup or a stew. Now, in terms of storage containers, I will often use a pint size or a quart size plastic container. If you look online, you will find them labeled as deli containers. And if you have a local restaurant supply store, then you can visit the store and pick up a smaller quantity. Otherwise, they come in cases of 500 or 1,000 sometimes, and that can last a long time. Not to mention, it takes up a lot of space at home. So you can buy a smaller quantity from these stores. Depending on the food, sometimes it goes into a glass container with a tight, snapping lid. If they're other individual food items, produce items, like I mentioned a few minutes ago in today's program, I'll lay them out on a sheet pan to freeze them individually, and then collect them up and put them in a Ziploc bag so that I can draw them out individually or in a quantity that's convenient for some future project. Okay. Hopefully that answers your questions. It's pretty low tech, sheet pans and Ziploc bags and some storage containers. All right, thank you. All right, next up, if you have taken the professional course, can you transfer credits to the plant-based course since there is some overlap? So at present, we do not offer a credit transfer process. Okay, I will add that as you move from one course to the next, and you're going to find some overlap in different areas. My first encouragement is as you go through these lessons or these assignments, you're always offered more than one recipe, right, to present or to practice. And, my suggestion to students is always to try out another recipe, broaden your understanding of that particular cooking method or that technique, deepen that skill set as you move through, your cooking journey. The other thing that I'll add is that when it comes to some of the assignments, you always have the option of submitting the same photographs if you choose to do that. We do ask you to consider your experience, and probably you have had some additional experience with that particular food product or that type of preparation or that cooking method in the intervening period of time. So we ask that your descriptions perhaps are written anew, and they reflect your deeper understanding of again, the process or that food item since the last time you made that dish. Okay, so those are a couple of approaches that will help your learning, that will broaden your knowledge and deepen your skill development. All right, thank you. All right, from Sarah, hello. Okay, so it looks like Sarah is not in attendance. Question is about using vegetable oils, okay, and those not being healthy. When a recipe really requires a neutral oil, is extra virgin olive oil, EVOO, the best substitute? So I guess it depends on who you ask, right? If you want to use oil, then probably a less refined oil is going to be a, quote unquote, healthier choice because it has more of the vitamins and minerals present. Okay. But there are certainly some folks out there that would say it doesn't matter, right? If it's added oil, it's still going to potentially, have the same sort of detrimental effect on your health. All right, so I'll leave that up to you. Again, I think if you are choosing an oil, however, that one that is less refined is arguably a little better. Thank you. Next up, Lorena. Hello, how you doing? I'm about to go do fresh pasta dough and pretty excited about it. I've read some students had difficulties with the dough holding up. The recipe calls for silken tofu. Wouldn't drained firm tofu help in holding it better? Let me go through a couple of thoughts that come to mind. The eggless, dairyless pasta dough recipe that we offer. It uses wheat flour, and it does incorporate tofu, and that's going to be a source of fat and other goodness in the dough, replacing some of the fat from eggs, for example, protein as well. But mainly the structure is coming from the wheat flour, the gluten in the wheat flour. And so when a person has had some challenges with the integrity of dough, whether it's pasta dough or bread dough, for example, it's very often due to insufficient kneading, sometimes too much kneading. Okay, and so with practice, we're going to, if we're doing it by hand, the guideline is often 8 to 10 minutes. It's at a moderate pace. Okay, so it's not rough handling of the dough. So one I guess telltale sign is after kneading for some period of time, if the dough starts to tear on the surface, it's time to let it rest. Okay. And then you can come back to it. It depends on the dough. It could be, half an hour later. It could be a couple hours later. And you can continue that process as needed, whether it's a secondary knead or, breaking it down into smaller portions for rolling in this case. All right. Now, regarding the choice of tofu, I don't necessarily think the type of tofu, should be a big deal. There certainly could be some difference that results, but again, as far as the structure goes, it shouldn't be a deal breaker whether you're using silken tofu or medium or firm. You'll need to make some adjustments relative to the moisture content of the tofu. Okay, and so that's where some practice as we add flour during the initial mixing and then the kneading process comes into play. Okay, so I think dough handling really calls for practice, and so you follow the directions initially, but certainly make adjustments and then do this a few times, and you'll develop muscle memory, and that experience goes a long way as well. All right, thank you. All right, another question from Sammy. What's the shelf life of the 5 mother sauces in the fridge? How many days max? Always, once we need to reheat the velote, okay, can we add water or wine if we don't have any stock? And also, can we freeze it? So multiple parts to the question here. So number one, how many days maximum shelf life? I don't know. Very rarely do we do tests for maximum shelf life. There's just so many variables actually, depending on your own refrigerator and where in the refrigerator the item is placed, the temperature of your refrigerator, how many times the fridge is open and closed in the course of some period of time. All of these things make a difference. I will say generally that when it comes to leftover food, mother sauces included, that, about a week is the quick answer. And then, of course, as you start to approach that week, use all of your senses to determine the quality of that food. And if you're still, safe to move forward with it. Certainly the bacteria count, right, increases as an item sits in the refrigerator from day 1 to day 2 to day 3 and so forth, until finally, at some point, we see mold spores, right? But before we saw mold spores, they were in there, right, starting to do their work. And so, just understand that it's a gradual process, whether it's bacteria or yeast or something else, they're all active during that storage period. So that's one reason why when we reheat food, the guideline is to bring it up to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, again, for at least 15 seconds in order to neutralize some of those microorganisms and then bring it down, in number. Okay. But roughly a week. Okay. And in terms of shelf life, when we reheat a velote, can we add water or wine? Do not add wine. Wine is just is too strong in flavor. First of all, heat it up, because the roux, right, when it's cooled, will start to set up, and so the heat itself will start to soften that mixture, and then as needed, add water to thin it down. Okay, but add water in just very small quantities to get to that desired point. Now, I guess if you add too much water, you can always reduce it, evaporate that water and then thicken it up again. Okay, and you can make that adjustment. Now, if it's necessary, for whatever reason, like perhaps the roux broke, in that case, you'll need to make a fresh roux and then incorporate that into the sauce and then adjust the consistency that way. Okay, so do keep that in mind. And then does it freeze well? You can certainly freeze a roux thickened sauce, so the Espagnole, the Velote, and the bechamel, but the roux tends to break. So, in which case you'll need to be prepared to possibly make a fresh roux and then combine that with the thawed sauce to stabilize it again. Okay. Tomato sauce does not call for a roux, so that is easily frozen and thawed and reused. Again, be prepared to make an adjustment to seasonings and then sometimes the consistency with a little bit of water. The last mother sauce is hollandaise, and hollandaise is much more fragile, and we don't want to refrigerate nor freeze a hollandaise. It's best used real time. Okay, thank you. And next up, all right, Sammy, what's the difference between velouté and gravy? Not a thing, actually. So velouté is a roux thickened stock. And if you think about, many of the gravies, which are made from pan drippings that are, deglazed, loosened up from the surface of the pan with some sort of a liquid. It could be wine, it could be stock. And then oftentimes the volume is brought up with more stock to the desired volume for service. And then that flavorful liquid is thickened with a roux. It's tightened up with a roux. And so it's the same thing as a velouté. All right. Velouté happens to be the French term that we use in the kitchen. Thank you. All right. Next up, is there a specific ingredient that can be used to replace peppers in recipes? So when I see the word pepper, a few things come to mind. I think about peppercorns. And, if you want to replace peppercorns, as a source of heat, you might look for long pepper, piper longum. You might look for ginger, as a choice. Or, it could be chilies, right? Chili peppers or capsicums. Well, I should be careful the usage of that term too. Now, when I look at the word pepper, I think about bell peppers, right? Sometimes called capsicums in some parts of the world. And these are zero heat chilies. And, these can be easily replaced, I think, with just any other sort of favorite vegetable that might impart a similar color and a similar texture. Something that you like that would be suitable for the dish that you're making. And, it could be eggplant, it could be onions, it could be most anything else, again, that you find enjoyable. When I see the word peppers, I also think about chilies. I think about hot chilies. And so chilies are accompanied by flavor as well as heat. And so if it is a specific flavor associated with a chili, then it can be difficult to substitute. If you do make a substitution, then the result will be different. If it's the heat of the chilies that you want to replace because you don't have hot chilies, then you can always use something like ginger or black pepper in its place. If it is some of the flavor of chilies that you want, but you don't want the heat, then consider sweet paprika, right? Or a paprika that doesn't have any heat associated with it. You'll get the color impartation. You'll get some of those beautiful flavor notes, but without the heat that we might associate with cayenne pepper or cayenne chilies, for example. All right, thank you. And then the next question is non-stick foil bad? When I think about foil, I think about aluminum foil. And, I'll leave that up to you. There are certainly sources out in the world that would dissuade us from using foil at all. Not having our food come into contact with aluminum. I use foil once in a while. Sometimes it makes contact with my food. Sometimes I put plastic wrap first and then foil on top of that, depending on what I'm doing. So that's another way to approach foil use. I use it. I don't keep my food in contact with foil for a long time, but maybe that it can still be harmful. I don't know. I'll let you do some reading and make that that decision for yourself. It's really a very personal decision, I think, after all. All right, thank you. And next up, which do you think is healthier for cooking, stainless steel or ceramic cookware? I don't have ceramic cookware, and I really haven't read much about it in terms of any sort of analysis. I've used stainless steel for years, and on occasion I come across something on the internet that would indicate that one should be concerned with stainless steel. I don't think too much about it. I use iron, I use aluminum, I use copper, I use tinned copper, stainless steel clad copper, clay, all kinds of cookware. And none of it bothers me. So I kind of like the previous question. If you have a particular concern about cookware material, I'll let you take a look at what's on the internet or from other sources, and make that a very individual decision for you and your household. All right, thank you. All right, next question. Any recommended composters to get to cut down on vegetable scraps going into the landfill? I don't have any particular brand or item that comes to mind. I think there are lots on the interwebs, and with so many different types of kitchen technology, when I'm asked a question like this, I will usually suggest that you take a look at any of the reviews that are online, consumer reviews as well as industry reviews if possible, or otherwise reviews from professionals in that particular field, and then make that decision for yourself. Some of it has to do with size, some of it has to do with where you place the composter. And so there are going to be some things to consider that are unique to your own situation. So do take a look at some of those reviews online. All right, thank you. All right, next up. How can I effectively manage smaller kitchen if you have to cook several dishes? Wow, this is a wide open question, and I think one that could take a while to answer. So, let me come up with maybe just a quick tip or two to share with you. Of course, it's all about timing. It's all about logistics. It's all about creating storage surfaces. And it could be a shelf of some sort. It could be, again, any flat surface where you can set your mise en place, or items in process, or items that have been cooked but need to be held until service time. All right. So I think that sort of storage space is very important. I'll give you, some insight to commercial kitchens. The same issue exists. And in commercial kitchens, we use what's called a speed rack, which is a vertical rack with many slots to hold sheet pans. And it's a way of really maximizing the efficiency of a small space. And not that I'm suggesting that you go out and buy a speed rack for your home kitchen, although some of my friends have them. But to mimic that idea, right, of creating storage space, on, wherever it is, on top of your dining room table for a short time, on top of your sofa for a short time. These are all surfaces that I've used at home, to get me through some larger cooking projects. But otherwise, I think to better answer your question, I would need to see your kitchen to give specific feedback. Okay, hope that gives you a start. Thank you. All right, next up from Carol. I think I'm stirring, pan tossing, or peeking under the lids too often. I'm not sure if food is taking longer to cook because of it. Any insight? Is there a way to define stir frequently versus stir occasionally? There are definitely times when we need to just leave the food alone and let the heat do its work. And, the idea of lifting a lid and peeking too often can, slow down or the cooking process or prolong the cooking process, as heat escapes each time we take the lid off. So that's a possibility. Let me think here. So in terms of, the stirring frequently versus occasionally, if you're trying to promote browning on a surface, the food needs to sit in contact with the hot bottom of the pan until the browning can take place. And so we don't want to stir too often. Okay, so that would be an example of stir occasionally. Now, there are situations where an item is relatively high in sugar, for example, with a tomato sauce, where scorching on the bottom of the pan can happen pretty easily. And we want to keep that product moving in the pan so it doesn't stick and burn. And that would be an example of stir frequently. Okay, just a couple of easy examples, but maybe using those as anchor points in your imagination. Think about other foods, okay, as you're cooking, and what sort of attention they might need based upon what you want to do. Okay, the end results that you want to achieve. All right, thank you. All right, next up, how do I include meals that my other members of my family can enjoy, plant-based dishes, and we can enjoy meals together? So I'm insulin resistant, pre-diabetic. So what comes to mind for me is that, if you've got family members that still enjoy animal-based foods, then make the transition slowly, right? There's no reason necessarily to make an abrupt shift from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet. Some of you out there might argue with me, but I think if we're trying to show people the plant-based way and a plant-strong lifestyle, then make that change gradually. And we start to cut down on portion size, right, of those plant-based food items, while we start to bolster at the same time the plant-based offerings on the plate or at the table. Now, it becomes very important also to develop flavor in everything at the table. And a lot of people have the preconception that plant-based foods are bland. Well, they're only bland if you make them bland, right? But they can just as easily be tasty and flavorful. And, that's where I think moving through a Ruby course and developing the foundation of cooking becomes very important to that end. Okay. And then also, I always recommend not making a big deal out of the plant-based foods at the table. Just make a beautiful meal and serve it, while you start to decrease the animal portion sizes. Okay, and then just let your family slowly make the transition that way. All right. And then, in terms of overall health is concerned, focus on whole foods. Okay. Understand that diabetes is also largely affected by, fat, especially added oils in the diet. Be cognizant of that, as we cook. So perhaps if someone is pre-diabetic or diabetic, then not only watching sweets, but also watching fats, especially cooking fats, is a good idea. Thank you. All right, next up. Hello, Lori. I'm wondering if you have tips of the best way to cook and preserve or retain the beautiful purples in carrots and green beans I've been receiving from my CSA and little garden. Let me share a couple of things. Purples, I think most often come from the anthocyanin family of pigments, and those are enhanced with acid or an acidic environment, right? And then they sort of bleed out, or they're altered with a basic environment. All right, so the first thing to consider is to add acid, and very often a quick acid soak, in acidulated water, where about maybe 2 or 3 teaspoons of acid per cup of water as a pre-soak can stabilize those pigments. Okay, so give that a try. Now, at that ratio, once we finish up the cooking process and we're adding other flavorings to the item, the sourness from the vinegar is usually not noticeable. Now, if it is, then you might just either cut back on the vinegar in the acidulating water, right? Or you can bolster up the flavor, however you want to balance that. All right. Another thing to consider is the cooking time, right? Because it is heat exposure that will damage those pigments, and they fade and they turn brown over time. So relatively short cooking procedures or processes are going to be best. 3-4 minutes or so. So you might have things that still have some nice al dente-ness to them once they're done. Okay, sautéing works well in oil. Okay, that also tends to sort of stabilize pigments. Steaming can work very well, with this pigment family. All right, so again, 3, 4, 5 minutes or so is usually adequate before we might see degradation of the pigment. So keep those things in mind, right? Acidity, right, as well as a fairly quick cooking process. Thank you. All right, Sammy's up again. For hollandaise sauce, as per the instructor, it should hold only for a few hours. In case for restaurant preparation, what do you advise? Can we store it in the fridge, or can we freeze it? If so, can we reheat it? The hollandaise sauce. So, hollandaise sauce is really a lovely sauce, and I think part of the loveliness of the sauce is its finickiness, and you have to be really careful. Talk to it nicely. Keep it nice and warm, but not too warm, not too cool. So it's that Goldilocks sort of treatment here. Hollandaise sauce, if you're really making a traditional hollandaise with no additives, added, and no stabilizers added, then it has a short shelf life. And if you're in a restaurant, you're lucky if you get through the entire service period with a batch of hollandaise. I mean, more often than not, it's going to break. So we're making more than one batch to get through a service period. Okay. Otherwise, very frequently in a restaurant, some sort of a stabilizer is used. All right. And, there are commercial products available to make hollandaise or to add to your hollandaise to stabilize it, so you can get through a few hours of the service period. All right. Otherwise, nope, don't refrigerate them and don't freeze them. Otherwise, they will break. Okay. As the clarified butter congeals, once it thaws, or melts, I should say, it's going to separate from the water component, and you'll have a broken sauce. All right. That can be rescued. That can be saved in most cases. But that's another additional step. All right. So do keep that in mind. Thank you. All right. Next question. In the pasta section of the Pro Cook course, the activity is to make vegan manicotti. Is it okay to make the recipe not vegan? I don't really want that much soy in my diet. Well, if you have a dietary concern, then we must avoid the soy. In which case, go ahead and proceed as you need to with that recipe. Otherwise, we do ask that you have the experience in that short plant-based section to understand some of these staple ingredients in the plant-based kitchen. All right. The idea is to prepare you to cook for a broader audience. All right. Now, I understand that very often one would take the Pro Cook course to cook for themselves, right? To cook for their own family. But very often we have folks that do want to make a go at it in the broader world of cooking professionally. And hence we have a broad foundation of lessons in that course. And, when you do cook for another audience, a broader audience, you very often don't get to choose what you make, right? It's your client that chooses for you, or it's the chef that you work for that's telling you to make something. And so we're trying to prepare you for these different scenarios. Okay, so I appreciate your understanding of that broader context as well. Thank you. All right. Hello, Jocelyn. Welcome. So you're in the Pro Certificate course, which could be Pro Plant or Pro Cook. I'm not sure. I'm devoting 8 hours a day to the course, and I'm moving pretty quickly. Boy, at 8 hours a day, I bet you are. I've been in the culinary industry a long time. Is this okay that I'm moving so fast? My quick answer is sure. Yeah, I think that's okay. So long as you're benefiting the best you can, right, from the content. And very often a student benefits from some time, right, as we are exposed to new information, and then we give ourselves a chance to repeat that task. Because repetition, right, is so important to learning. And also the passage of time also helps the information as well as that newly acquired skill to crystallize, within our own minds and through muscle memory. And so there's certainly, within the field of education, if we're talking about the pedagogy here of the course, there is certainly some benefit to slowing down a little bit and allowing the benefit of time to set in. But if you're short on time, then you must move at your own pace. All right. So do consider both of those approaches. Thank you. All right, Carol. You recommended cooling hot foods quickly when storing in order to avoid bacteria growth. I usually let our leftover foods sit out to cool off outside the fridge so as not to introduce heat to the fridge. How long is it safe to keep cooling food out? That's an open-ended question, again, because there potentially are so many variables, and it depends on ambient air temperature. Arguably, it depends on the food item itself, okay? Depends on cleanliness or the level of sanitation of food containers and utensils that might touch that food. But I do the same thing, and I'll let things sit out, sometimes hours at a time, and I don't have a concern with it. Um, so everyone in my environment, I would consider to be healthy. In other words, I'm not working with a higher risk individual or population. If I were, I would take more precautions. If my grandparents lived with me, or my father, for that matter, or if I were cooking, at a retirement home and had a certain audience, or if I had a newborn here in the house, I would take additional precautions, I think, and speed up that process by using ice bath, by using a fan, these different means to get that food into the fridge sooner. I don't have a particular period of time to quote for you, but if what you've been doing has been working for you, then that should be fine. All right. If you have any concerns, then try to shorten that cooling time. All right. Thank you. All right, Eric, welcome. I like you already. I just finished my final for the Wegmans Partner course, and I wanted to know how the survey is graded, since it's 10% of the grade. Is it based on how we graded the course? I loved it regardless. Well, son of a gun here. I will say that the final survey makes its way to our student support team, and so I don't see the surveys. And you get 100%. Let me just start off by saying that. Okay, you get 100% on the survey. I know that. It's relatively heavyweight. Would be to encourage you to finish the survey, because that information, it really is so important to us, right? One thing I'll mention to you and to everybody in all of our courses out there is that we're constantly updating courses. And that, that's my world. I'm the director of culinary instruction, and I oversee content quality. And I'm constantly, and I mean daily, tinkering with courses, either fixing spelling errors, or editing the wording of a quiz question for clarity, or looking for the latest information for a link. And so the information, the feedback that goes into the surveys is really important to us. While I don't see surveys in entirety, I do see sections, especially when a person has some specific feedback, right, that would benefit me and those on my team as we, go through this ongoing process of keeping our courses right at the edge for you. Okay, and so hopefully that makes sense. There's nothing that's going against you. It's just to encourage you to complete the survey. All right, keep on cooking. Thanks. All right, next up from Catherine. How do you prepare meat from the store before cooking? Do you wash it with water, pat it dry, both? Potentially both. If it's a poultry item, which tends to have more bacteria on it, they just spoil faster. So I put those under water and give it a little rubby-dub-dub scrub, and then pat it dry. Otherwise, most items do get a little padding from paper towels, because I'm often applying a dry heat method, in which case caramelization is part of the game, and caramelization is best developed on a dry surface. Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, next up from Linda. I started a program a couple years ago, had to stop, and now want to resume. What steps are needed? Linda, please reach out to our student support team at support@ruby.com, and they can answer any questions that you might have and help you get back on the path. Thank you. All right, Lorena, tabbouleh. Okay, so what did I make? I think yesterday. Lots of parsley, and I'm not picky. I'll use flat leaf or curly, whatever's available down the street at the store. And I had some white onions, so I used those. Again, I'm not too picky. I'll use yellow or red onions. And then I had a bunch of simmered rye berries, so just the whole rye grain. And so a bunch of that went in. And I used the last lime I had, but I wanted more sourness. So I added some sumac, which is it's a souring agent, we would call it. It's a spice, a red powder. And so it adds a nice look as well. Sumac comes from the Mediterranean basin, and historically, its use predates citrus, which came from Southeast and East Asia, from China, present-day China, basically. And so before people were using the wonderful acidity of lemons, they were using sumac. So that went into the tabbouleh. And then lately I've been using tahini, just a little drizzle, or maybe a generous drizzle as a binder, as a dressing of sorts. And so that was the foundation of last night's tabbouleh. And we had some flatbread, among other things, at the table. Thanks. All right, Nancy, how you doing? See, good forks over knife article for freezing veggies and fruits. Excellent. Thanks so much for including that link. I hope others today that are curious will take a look at that. Thank you, Nancy. How long does parchment paper last? Parchment paper is reusable, right? And parchment paper will, in my experience, my opinion, it will last until it starts to crumble around the edges, right, or tear very easily, and or maybe it gets so oily that you don't want to use it. So totally subjective sort of an approach, but I try to get a few uses out of it before throwing it away. All right, thank you. And next up, how do you recommend washing veggies, and when do I use my fancy convection oven settings? All right, so how to wash veggies. There are a lot of approaches here, and part of it might depend upon the particular items in question. I think especially during this period of coronavirus, have been a little more vigilant about washing things as they come in from the store, so that they are washed and ready to go when cooking starts. And they just quickly go into some rinsing water. We sometimes, for items that have a hard exterior, it could be a winter squash, for example, might use just a smidge of detergent on the scouring pad, but often not. Just the scouring pad itself, just a light scrubbing will do the trick, at least in my own mind. I don't have any issues with that. But otherwise, a rinse, at the very least, a rinse is what we're doing, and a little elbow grease, right, as you're rubbing on it with your scrubby pad. Okay, and when do you use your fancy convection oven setting? So the convection setting, it's a fan in the back of the oven, and so it promotes air circulation, and it increases the overall temperature. And so foods will brown faster. So you have to be aware of over browning or even burning. So sometimes we lower the oven temperature, or we might cover an item with foil to protect it from the excess heat. Okay. But really, wherever you want some good browning, do consider the convection setting. For very light and delicate items, be aware that if the fan is particularly strong, that it can actually blow an item over. So once it bakes, it'll be at an angle. So do be aware of those possible results. Also, there are times when the fan will blow up the edge of parchment paper and stick to something that you're baking, like the edge of cookies, for example. So you might weight down the edge of the parchment paper with something, or otherwise just be aware of that. Okay, you can maybe position cookie dough or whatever at the very edge of the parchment paper so it doesn't have a chance to flip up. Okay, but otherwise, yeah, you bet. Whenever you want a good color, use that convection setting. All right, thanks. All right, next up, I think I'm okay. Yeah, I think we touched upon this. Let me head on down here. All right, so another question here from Linda. I was a Ruby student a few years ago. I stopped my training. I like to pick up where I left off. I was taking the grains and legumes course, which is one of our short courses. Would this be okay? I'm really excited to take more classes. Let me know your thoughts. Yeah, you bet, Linda. I think as I just mentioned to you, pick up at your convenience, and you can certainly finish up that particular course. Jump to another short course. Maybe you're ready to do one of our longer courses. The Forks Over Knives 90-day course, if you're interested in plant-based, is a great place to start. If you're feeling pretty hardy and want to do a longer 6-month course, and we have both the Pro Cook and Pro Plant courses, but do reach out, as I mentioned, to support@ruby.com to explore your options. Thank you. And Lorena, can braised seitan be frozen? Yes. Quick answer is yes. I just did the task and it was a lot. Also, I don't have any gluten issues, but eating seitan is like eating bread. Even though I am a bread person, I don't see myself cooking it too often. What are your thoughts? I don't prepare seitan very often at all. I don't mind eating it once in a while if someone else made it for me. I'm usually reaching for my whole grains and making something down that path. All right, thanks. And next up, I'm taking the FOK cooking course. One task uses Madeira or Marsala wine to deglaze. We are a no alcohol household. Can you suggest some alternatives to wine? I'm assuming broth can be used, but wondered if there is anything else. So, you hit it right on the head there. Use some sort of a flavorful liquid. At the top of my list is stock, a broth, which is the same thing. And that usually does the trick. I mean, in a pinch, if you need a deglaze, water works as well, but preferably a flavorful liquid. All right, thank you. And next up from Vanessa, taken the wok class and have a couple of questions about a wok purchase. Would an 18 or 15 gauge be better? Cast iron, stainless steel, or steel plate for a ring? Aha. I'm apt to opt for a 15 gauge just to get a little more even heat distribution, throughout the pan. Number two, but yeah, you might be able to go either way, but my gut instinct was 15 gauge. And then number two, as far as the ring, so cast iron, stainless steel, or steel plate for a ring. How about stainless steel? I'm a big fan of stainless steel. Stainless steel is pretty hardy stuff. Cast iron is too, but arguably takes a little bit careful handling. You don't want to drop it. It can crack. Steel plate probably has the shortest life of the three materials that you mentioned. That the heating, cooling cycle repeatedly is apt to weaken the plating over time. I'd opt for stainless steel. All right, thanks. And then continued. Okay, if the ring is not a grate itself, would you remove the grate and place the ring directly around the gas burner? Yes. I guess I'm trying to envision. I'm envisioning some different scenarios. I guess that's the what's slowing me down here. I will say, first of all, that sometimes when you flip your grate upside down, there's a kind of a built-in place for a wok to sit. I had been pleasantly surprised to find that. So do take a look at that. Yeah, but otherwise, in order to get maximum fire, maximum heat around the pan, around the wok, it's probably best to remove other encumbrances, right? So the existing grate, and then see how just a ring might work in that setting. All right, thank you. All right, next up, good day. I'm signed up for the October vegan desserts course and have a few questions. Is there a list of ingredients for the course? Yes, there is. So as you start the course, you will see a multi-paged list of ingredients that will be used throughout the course. Okay. Can you re-watch the class? The quick answer is yes. You can go back and forth and watch videos and reread content, okay, as needed. Is there a textbook? No, there's not. All the content is going to be in the form of text or video in the course itself. All right, so no supplemental textbook. And how do we save recipes? So on the recipe itself, you can click on bookmark, and then you can retrieve that recipe by going to your Ruby dashboard. So not the course dashboard, but the Ruby dashboard. Well, you'll see a place for bookmarked items, and you can take a look at your collection there. And are assessments written or practical? It's a combination of both. Okay, we've got a number of different types of activities throughout the course, and assessments in particular are written, and they're in the form of multiple choice or true/false questions, as well as questions where you might look at 2 or 3 photographs, for example, and then choose the best photograph that responds to the question that's being asked. And sometimes it's also a video clip, maybe a 7-second video clip, and you'll have 2 or 3 of those, and you'll choose the one that best responds to the question that's being asked. All right. And then all of your cooking projects that are graded by your instructor, by Fran, will be photo upload assignments. So those are all assessed, and you'll be given directions on how to do that, on the assignment page. All right, thank you. All right, next up, onion and garlic and spicy don't always agree with me to the extent of the quantity in most recipes. I always cut back, but at least I have been able to eat on a smaller scale. I would like to know what else I can cook with for flavor. So Abigail, the first thing that comes to mind for me is to use more spices and also fresh herbs. I'll start by mentioning that when it comes to onions and garlic, that there's a particular spice. It's called asafoetida. And if you go to an Indian grocery store or other South Asian grocery store, it's you might be able to ask for it by the name hing, H-I-N-G. And it's a plant resin that mimics some of these aromatic qualities of garlic and onion. And it's a popular substitute in South Asia. But otherwise, as you pull out some of these pungent ingredients that are used to add flavor, you want to replace those with some equally interesting items. And so I think about spices first of all, and also fresh herbs. And just below your question, you'll see that Patrick has provided a link to one of our archived live events on spices. So please take a look at that. Thank you. And so Sharon is asking, can I reset a student in a class that they failed? Sharon, please reach out to support@ruby.com, and then we can help you with that process. All right, thank you. And then next up, I recently made the vegan pho recipe for the FOK course. I'd love to make the stock in my Instant Pot. What do you suggest for dealing with the citrus recommended? I also have quite a bit of Thai basil I'd like to preserve. What do you suggest? As far as the citrus goes, if you want to experiment with this process in the Instant Pot, decrease the quantity and then practice. You might start with maybe just 25% or so. And then, see what the end result is, if it's too bitter for you or something else, and then make adjustments from there. Otherwise, just omit it. And then, when you move towards service, you can just serve some lime on the side, lime juice squeezed in. The pho is a common, at the table sort of service method. Okay. And then Thai basil, Thai basil is very fragile, right, in its aroma. And by and large, I haven't had any success preserving Thai basil. I try to, just use it up. And in some of these dishes, especially with stir fries of any sort, I find that also in the context of Thai home cooking, for example, that Thai basil can be used in great quantity, almost as a vegetable itself. It is added just at the time of service to preserve the aroma, and that's really the best way that I find to using any excess that I have. But otherwise, you might try, either pureeing it or chopping it and then putting it into small parcels and freezing it, and then just see how you like those results. All right, thank you. So Lorena says, regarding the vegan pho test, I did it in my Instant Pot and it was fine. No issues with the citrus getting bitter or anything. I had to check it a couple of times for flavor, but it worked out fine. Excellent. Thanks so much for your feedback. Okay, so hopefully that'll help inform Sandra's process as well. And next up, thoughts on doing the tempeh pre-cook in a pressure cooker. Yeah, I think that can be quite fine, right? That initial softening or moisturizing step in a pressure cooker is quite fine. In order to figure out the best pressure and timing, it might take a little bit of practice, but I think that's a perfect tool or piece of equipment to use. Thanks. All right, Carol asks, when reheating foods to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, do you measure the degrees without using a thermometer? Typically not. If it's a watery, liquidy food like a stew or a soup, for example, if it comes up to a simmer, right, you're at 180 to 200 degrees, so you're definitely in that safer zone. Okay. If it's a stir fry, if it's hot, if you touch it and it feels pretty darn hot, you're probably fine. But in order for you to train yourself, you might use a thermometer initially or the first three times, okay, until you can figure out by touch or by sight, what kind of cues to look for that accompany a temperature at 165 degrees Fahrenheit or greater. Okay, and to follow up with your questions here. What do your senses tell you when you reach that temperature? Okay, so I mentioned, visually, any sort of bubbling is going to be, exceeding 165 degrees. Now, what's important here is that with these wet items, you need to stir it adequately so that the whole mixture is evenly hot, right? Not just the sides or the bottom of the pot, right? Which is a mistake that's made not uncommonly when we find out that a foodborne illness outbreak was associated with a particular improperly handled food item. Okay. So I often bring food to a slight boil, but it might be overcooking. So, regarding the quality of the food product in the pot, it might be overcooking at that point, but that's the nature of reheating overcooked food. Of once cooked food is that it is likely going to be overcooked a little bit. And so that's just something we get to deal with if we have leftovers. Okay, thank you. All right, next up, making first-time raw tortillas in brand new dehydrator. Is it okay to put parchment paper directly on the trays, or do I need to order more silicone pads? I've asked the manufacturer, Googled, etc. Value your esteemed opinion. One of the things with the silicone pads, at least the ones that I've used, is that they have some of them have very, very small holes in them, which allow a little bit of air transfer, which you're not going to get with a parchment sheet. But otherwise, give it a try and see how the results come out, right, in terms of the timing and the texture that you're after. Okay, that's there's not much risk, right, in trying. That's my recommendation. All right, thank you. So next up, storage of ginger question. How do you store it whole when brought home from the store before you use it? In the fridge? I go back and forth, and we've got a big stash in the fridge right now, but frankly, sometimes it sits out. Either way, the name of the game is to mitigate dehydration. Okay. Both environments are going to dehydrate the product. And so in a fridge right now, it's in the crisper drawer, and I might even consider covering it with a towel to protect it from any air circulation. Okay. And then, as with any food, the most important thing is to eat it, to enjoy it. So we don't bump into the question of a degraded quality. Okay. Thank you. Can you talk about sprouting? So the next question. Use the tray or jar sprouting is easier. So, here at home, we will sprout grains as well as legumes, and we don't use any particular trays or sprouting jars. Instead, we'll soak the product, overnight, and then we just bunch it up in a towel, in a kitchen towel, and then hang it. And usually just going to tie the four corners and hang it over a cupboard doorknob. And then, before long, you're going to see sprouts. And especially during the warmer time of the year, that happens pretty quickly. If it seems to be kind of slow in its sprouting action, then maybe once a day, just dunk it in some water to moisturize the whole package of grains or legumes, and then hang it up again. And you're going to get sprouts, right? There's that inner intelligence, right, with each one of those beans or grains, and they know what to do. And so that's our approach. All right, thank you. All right, Diana, how do you do? Some of the cooking instructions state to bring a pot of cold water to a boil. Is it okay to start with warm or hot water to save time? Yeah, you bet. I think that's fine. I think, generally when this topic comes up, what has come to mind, among professionals that we've talked with this about this with, is that, very often in places like the U.S., hot water comes from a tank, right? The hot water tank. And over time, the interior of the tank develops brown algae, And there's a little bit of maybe an off flavor that could come from that, or maybe from the pipes, depending again on just where you are. And to avoid that sort of flavor getting into the food, we encourage cold water to be used. But warm or hot water from the tap could certainly be used. Okay, thank you. And next up, what is your thought about using ghee in your food? How much one should consume per day? We use ghee every day at home. And we use it both for cooking as well as in addition to our food. And wow, what's the recommended daily quantity of ghee? I don't know. If I'm using it for cooking, I try to minimize it. It's like I would any other sort of a cooking fat. When it comes to the addition of ghee, I don't know. Sometimes, with I don't know, khichdi or certain things, maybe modak, I end up putting lots of ghee on some things. But otherwise, it's a small drizzle. Yeah, I don't know. You might take a look at that online in terms of general fat consumption and see what you find that is comforting to you, right? And your style of eating at home. Okay. Sorry for the vague answer, but that's an individual health question at the end of the day. But for flavor, yeah, I just enjoy a drizzle here and there, except for modak. All right. Next up, is corn flour a substitute for agar? Well, some sort of a cooked starch, acts as a thickener. And so most any sort of a cooked starch, can thicken something like agar, or can thicken a certain liquid. The characteristics are different, right? You usually, will have some opacity versus the clarity that agar offers. The texture can be different as well. Agar has a harder texture versus flours, which tend to have a softer, more pliable texture. So on one hand, there are other substitutions, as a thickener, but you want to consider other characteristics to gauge whether it's going to be suitable for your agar application. Okay, thank you. And from Gabriel, do we have to spend hundreds in knives, so hundreds of dollars, I suppose, or whatever your currency is, or does a mid-level price knife do the trick in terms of sharpness and how long it'll last? So, when it comes to cutlery, as it sounds like you well know, right, prices run the gamut. And it is really easy to spend several $100s on a single blade, especially if it's custom made. And boy, will you get lots of attention, and it'll cut great. You still have to maintain it, like all the knives, though. Keep that in mind. Now, on the other hand, I like value personally. And several years ago, in Consumer Reports magazine, they rated knives, and the one that they rated their best buy, so their best value, was the Victorinox brand, and that's the Swiss Army knife people. And their 8-inch chef's knife, I think is what it was, that they chose as their best buy. And it's a stamped steel blade. It's got a molded rubber handle, and it's an 8-inch chef's knife is relatively inexpensive. I have one of those in addition to all kinds of other cutlery here. And I find that particular knife, the steel is soft enough that it's relatively easy to sharpen and to maintain on a daily basis. It's hard enough that it maintains an edge reasonably long. And so I find it a pretty comfortable knife to use, and I wouldn't hesitate to recommend that knife, as a daily knife. All right, so do check it out. Thank you. Next up, course-related question, becoming a plant-based chef in 90 days. My question is, how many hours a day does this course, to do this course in 90 days? So the 90-day course, it must be the FOK, the Forks Over Knives course, okay? And let me explain some of the context here, at least from my vantage point, okay? The intent of the 90-day Forks Over Knives course is to provide you with some foundational skills and knowledge to give you more control over recipes and more confidence and more joy in the kitchen, all right? You would certainly be a more proficient cook, okay? If one has their eyes on some professional application of your cooking knowledge and skills, the 6-month Pro Plant certification course has a much broader foundation of topics that we cover. That would set one up for a much varied, food preparation possibilities. If one wants to take this to a professional level. Now, in terms of becoming a chef, let me talk about that. Chef is a title. It's a profession. And in my opinion, one is not an amateur chef. You're a cook. A chef is also a cook. All right. So the chef as a professional role has the responsibilities of hiring and firing and balancing a budget and turning a profit and all these sort of business related functions. It is a managerial position after all. At the foundation, right, a chef is a cook, and hopefully a pretty good one that has a broad foundation of skills and knowledge to handle the various situations that come at them. Okay. So, upon graduation of any of our courses, 6-month course, 90-day course, or something shorter, I wouldn't consider anybody a chef, but I would consider them a cook, and a cook of some skill and knowledge level based upon the effort that you put into the course. And as you move on down your path, right, of cooking and cooking professionally, then, you might find yourself in that role as a chef, taking on some of those professional responsibilities. So that's the context that I would like to create around this particular question, which is, I think, a very important and interesting question for you, as well as many of our current students and graduates. And the last one, batting cleanup, right, is Lorena. It's a pleasure to learn from you. Thank you so much. And I appreciate your engagement through your course and all the questions that you have asked here, as well as, through our other channels. And your explanations are wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate your appreciation of that. I really enjoy talking about food and talking about it thoroughly, right? So that people understand the broader context, the many options, and also that it's okay, right, to do things that best suit your particular situation, right? The control is in your hands. And I love the sprouting illustration about legume intelligence. Yeah, you bet. I'm a believer, right, that we all have our intelligence, right? Whether it's my pet cat, which I don't have, actually, just an example, or the grains sprouting, which I actually do have. There's something about life, and it's beautiful. And food is a beautiful topic, and I think we honor it at that level. All right. And that's the last question and comment here today. And I want to thank all of you for joining me for my office hours. And I look forward to seeing you again for your live event as we answer your questions again in the future. So until then, enjoy cooking and have a beautiful day. Thank you.